Assalamualaikum to Dr. Zaiti. My name is Muhammad bin Jaafar and I'm from BA 425G. Today I will be presenting my research study on the topic of an exploratory study on the relationship between macroeconomic variables and inflation rate in Egypt, South Africa, Jamaica, Uruguay and also Malawi. Without further ado, let's get started. Inflation is the pace at which the value of currency is decreasing, and as a result, the general price of goods and services is increasing. Inflation can be perceived positively or negatively based on the individual perspective and the pace of transition. The crisis of inflation that originated from the United States in 2007 had an increasingly perceived impact on the rest of the world, including the developing countries in 2008. By Bank Indonesia 2008. Moving to the problem statements, inflation rate will impact the economic growth in a country. High inflation rate indicates that the country is facing higher price of goods and services, higher living costs, higher cost of raw material but lower purchasing power. Inflation will not only impact individuals but also firms as well as banks in a country. The Federal Reserve has not established any official inflation target, but policymakers generally believe that an acceptable inflation rate is around 2% or below by Federal Reserve Bank 2011. So to conclude, in this part of problem statements, we are focusing on the country that have more than 2% of inflation rate. In this part of research objectives, we have developed 5 main objectives to investigate 5 independent variables, which are money supply, exchange rate, interest rate, unemployment rate and import of goods and services in 5 different countries that we choose, and it can be seen on the screen. Next, we look at the scope and limitation of the study. For the scope of the study, this study focuses on research area which are Egypt, South Africa, Jamaica, Uruguay and Malawi, and the macroeconomic variables for this study are money supply, exchange rate, interest rate, unemployment rate and import of goods and services. The data consists of 36 years annual data from 1984 to 2019. For the limitation of study, while conducting the study, it contains certain limitations. One of them is lack of data available. This is the major obstacle that we need to face, which hardly to find the accurate and reliable data, which some of the data do not available in the World Bank and even from the country database itself, and then we need to change our country because of the problem. Next point is lack of prior study on this topic. It is difficult find the relationship between independent variables that need to be put in the literature review. Finally, lack of knowledge and experience. This is because we do not have wide knowledge on how to conduct research paper, which this is the first time we do it, and it also time constraint, which we have deadline to submit this research paper. In this literature review, we have 5 sections which consist of 5 independent variables. The first one is money supply. We use monetarist theory to see the relationship with inflation. Study in Albanian economy by Turan and Hokhaj 2015 shows positive relationship between money supply and inflation rate. Research done by Kokmas 2017 in 9 Mediterranean countries indicates that a major significant relationship, while not with economic growth. The second one is exchange rate. We use purchasing power parity theory to see the relationship with inflation rate. According to Islam, Ghani, Mahyuddin and Manikam 2017, a study conducted by Menji said that the exchange rate has a negative relationship on inflation in Utopia. Exchange rate has negative and significantly influence inflation by Suhada and Susiani 2020. Thirdly, we have interest rate. The theory that we use to see the relationship with inflation is Fisher effect theory. According to Millian 2003, inflation rate will be high when the nominal interest is reducing and vice versa by Ramlan 1st, 2017. The fourth one is unemployment rate. The theory that we use to see the relationship with inflation rate is Keynesian theory. Conditions such as the labour market and other external variables affect the relationship between inflation and unemployment by Safranek and Carroll 2017. Most economists believe that there is an inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation by Kurniasi and Kartika 2020. And lastly, we have import of goods and services. The theory that been used to see the relationship with inflation rate is cost-push theory. According to Nazir 2016, there is a positive relationship between inflation and import value in Saudi Arabia. However, according to Munipapa and Shifani 2017, the findings are that imports in Namibia do not significantly affect the inflation in the short run. Moving to the theoretical framework. From the figure, the left side shows the independent variables which are money supply, exchange rate, interest rate, unemployment rate and also imports of goods and services, which the right side shows the dependent variable which is inflation rate. This theoretical framework shows the relationship between macroeconomic variables towards inflation rate. Higher production leads to a lower unemployment rate, further sparking demand. Increased wages leads to higher demand as clients invest more freely. This led to higher GDP combined with inflation. Lastly, most economists today believe that a small amount of inflation is more advantageous than harmful to the economy, around 1% to 2% a year. In this part of hypothesis development, we need to develop hypotheses which are null hypothesis and also alternate hypothesis. Null hypothesis means that each of the independent variables does not have relationship with the dependent variable, while alternate hypothesis means that each of the independent variables have relationship with dependent variable. Here, there are 5 hypotheses of the relationship which consists of null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. Move to the methodology part, we need to look for each variables and the proxy. For the dependent variable is inflation rate with the proxy CPI or Consumer Price Index. The first independent variable is money supply with the proxy is M2. Next, exchange rate with the proxy nominal effective exchange rate. Thirdly, interest rate with the proxy Fisher equation. Fourthly, unemployment rate with the proxy unemployment rate index. And lastly, import of goods and services with the proxy import price index. All the data were collected from the World Bank and also IMF. This is the most important part, which is findings and analysis. The first thing first, we need to run diagnostic check, starting with VIF procedure. I have run for Jamaica country, which consists of 4 IV, MS, IR, UR and IM after I have dropped ER from the test because it shows more than 5 for number of VIF. After we rerun VIF, since all VIF score below than 5, here we are able to accept all 4 independent variables. Move to the Durbin-Watson test, first order serial correlation, we got the number 1.149796. Since a DW stat does not fall within the range of 1.5 to 2.5, hence it requires us to rerun a serial correlation test at second order using Bruce-Godfrey for correction. For BG test, we got the number 1.852055 since a DW score at second order falls within the range of 1.5 to 2.5. Therefore, we have enough evidence to reject H null of having a severe correlation among the error terms. Last but not least, for diagnostic check, we have normality test or Jacobera 0.297241 since the p-value of Jacobera score above 0.1, which is significant. Thus, we have enough evidence to reject H null. We may conclude that our residuals are normally distributed. We move to the second part of findings and analysis, which is regression analysis. For the t-statistic test, we must look at the p-value of t-statistic. So here we can look that UR and IM significant at high level, which is 1%, and MS and IR not significant because it has above than 10%. For adjusted R-square, it has strong relationship, which is 60.16%. The variation in DV can be explained by UR and IM. For the F statistic, we must look at the p-value of F statistic, which is 0.0000. So the significant level of F statistic is at 1%. Hence, we have enough evidence to reject the H null. We may conclude that there is a significant relationship between at least one of the macroeconomic variables with inflation rate. Move to the implications of the study. The first one is significance to government. Since import of goods and services has positive relationship with inflation rate, which significant at 1%, government of Jamaica need to reduce the number of imported goods and services to the other countries by impose tariff in the imported goods and encourage more export, so this will help them to reduce the inflation rate. Second one is significance to employers. Since unemployment rate has positive relationship with inflation rate, which significant at 1%, employers do not need to put high expectation and strict requirement when searching for new employees. So if they create more job opportunity for people out there, it will reduce unemployment rate, which also lead to low inflation rate. In conclusion, based on the findings, only UR and IM have significant relationship with inflation rate, while the other three variables, which are MS, ER, and IR, have no significant relationship with inflation rate. The result shows from VIF, the score for MS, IR, UR, and IM are below 5, and there is no severe multicollinearity. And then we continue until the end of the test with those 4 variables. The other tests we run are serial correlation test, normality test, and multiple regression analysis. All of those tests had been done using EViews 11 system, and the results are accurately interpreted by using detailed explanation. Now, we have reached the last part of the presentation, which is recommendation for future research. Firstly, I would like to suggest that researchers to focus on specific regions such as Europe, Asia, and South America, or focusing more on countries that have high inflation. Next, use the other variables which not been used in our study. Researcher can take other variables such as export, economic growth, and public spending, which also among the factors that can affect the movement of inflation rate. Last but not least, change the time series data. Instead of use the annual data, researcher can either take monthly or quarterly data for the future studies to make it easier for them to find the data and get accurate result. That's all from me. Thank you for your time.